bring in our political editor now, Andrew Clennell. He joins me here at the desk. Andrew, great to see you. This tariff story is the gift that keeps on giving, and we've seen the effect in the markets. What kind of effect is it having on the government ahead of an election?
Well, that's really interesting, Laura, because both sides are claiming to me that it helps them. Peter Dutton, as the obvious way it could help him, I guess, he can argue, look, the Conservative government does better with Conservatives, has done better with Trump when it was Morrison. Albanese's seen as linked too closely to Joe Biden, and that's a problem for him. But on the Labor side, they think that if Dutton aligns himself too much to Trump, that could put a lot of voters off. And they believe that, I guess, their shield, if you like, is that he's doing it to everyone. Because if he was only doing it to some countries, they'd be in a lot more political trouble over this, let's face it. So at the moment, it was interesting having the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, on yesterday. He spoke a bit about the critical minerals offer, and he's talked about giving America an offer it can't refuse. But he also said he was telling Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, repeatedly, you're just putting your own prices up. And I said to him, well, I'm sure he took well to that, you know. But Don Farrell's argument is, look, if you keep telling them, and I guess if things like Ed was talking about, the markets keep crashing as a result of, you talk about tariffs, maybe the best hope is that Donald Trump will come to his senses. Here was the Trade Minister yesterday.
What we need to do, Andrew, is find out what it is that the Americans want in terms of this relationship between Australia and the United States, and then make President Trump an offer he can't refuse.
The deal that Australia put on the table was access to our critical minerals like lithium, manganese. What's the nature of that deal?
The offer to the Americans was, look, we'll work with you. You want these critical minerals. You want them for electric batteries in cars. You've mentioned some of the other things, mobile phones, all of these sorts of things. But the process of extraction is expensive.
Would that be Australian money or American money when you talk about increased investment in digging them out?
Both.
Okay, and that was put, so an Australian financial offer was put on the table?
No, it wasn't a financial offer in that sense. It was a way forward to try and get support both in Australia and in the United States for extracting these critical minerals.
Yeah, really interesting. That is a line, I think, and he used it at the Global Food Forum the Australian was hosting last week. It's a really good domestic line, isn't it? Well, the playing field's the same because our competitors haven't been given an exemption either. All it's doing is making it more expensive for the Americans. It's a great domestic line, but you make the point, Andrew, in speaking to Don Farrell, is that does that line really go down well in negotiations, that constant reminder? Yeah.
Look, I mean, that is going to be their tactic, hold the line. What else can you say to an extent? You can keep offering them things. What concerns me is we gave them a great big cheque for AUKUS and they still gave us the bird. After Donald Trump said we'll give great consideration to an exemption, that raised false hope in the government. There's no doubt about that.
Well, interesting to see what Malcolm Turnbull said about AUKUS this morning. It was some dumb guys making the deal, but, you know, he has a long history on that. He also backed Australia having some kind of peacekeeping force in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, I reckon my whole adult life we've been, you know, like this with the US. So are we moving into a time when we're not? And, you know, how much of this foreign policy argument on this is going to be part of the campaign? And I was thinking about coming on here and saying foreign policy is hardly ever part of a campaign. But let's face it, last campaign it was about China, the other superpower. Now it's going to be about America because I think Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese, there's a big difference here. And it's Albanese aligning himself with Keir Starmer and the Europeans on security. And even though Peter Dutton backs Ukraine, he's saying, well, why are we sending Australians? Let's worry, should I say, about our own region. So you can hear the difference here when you hear the Prime Minister. He stresses here it would be very small if we took part and there would have to be peace first. So there are so many caveats about this thing. You have to wonder how much of it is based on him being called weak by Peter Dutton all the time and saying, well, let me suggest something military. Here was the Prime Minister and the Deputy Liberal leader's view of it, her opposition to it yesterday.
First, of course, you need peace to have a peacekeeping force. In order to achieve that, Russia must agree to a ceasefire firstly, but it must also agree to stop its aggression against Ukraine. And so it is premature to talk about that detail, but what we want to see is peace so that you can have peacekeeping.
He's all over the place, Andrew. You heard him last week. Then some of his ministers tried to walk it back. Now he's joining in a phone call and talking about what might happen in the future. I think, and Australians believe, that we judge this Prime Minister on what he's done. And I don't think this government has stood with Ukraine in the way that they could have or they should have.
We're about to hear from Jim Chalmers about the hole that's been blown in the budget because of Cyclone Alfred. It's about $1.2 billion. Just before Alfred hit, we've been hearing about the coalition, what they wouldn't do with insurance, because obviously people are noting how much insurance is going up by on every front, car, home, etc. Where's the coalition at on this right now?
Well, they're going to do something maybe if they're in government, Pierce, but they're not going to announce a policy now. So it all started on Sunday agenda, right? I interviewed Peter Dutton. I did a pre-recorded interview. I said, what's your plan for insurance? Because it is a massive issue for businesses as well as for households. And they've been huge hikes. And he said, look, you know, we'll look to have the divestiture policy that we have for supermarkets. We'll force them to break up if there's market concentration. Then Angus Taylor and Susan Lee see the talking points from his office saying we've got no plans for that. They say that. They correct him. He comes out last week and says, no, I've still got a plan for that. And, you know, he knows this could be a vote winner, but hasn't gone through shadow cabinet. Susan Lee played her what she said, and she said there wasn't a cigarette paper of difference between what she said and what Peter Dutton said. Well, I'll tell you what, that's the biggest cigarette paper I've ever seen. Here's Susan Lee.
When we were in government, of course, we enacted divestiture around the energy sector. In opposition, we've said that our policy on divestiture would encompass already supermarkets and hardware stores. And then we said, both Peter Dutton and I and others, that if we get to government and there is evidence of concentration of market power in the insurance sector and the insurance industry is doing the wrong thing, what you just heard Peter Dutton refer to, then we won't hesitate to step in.
Are you concerned this insurance matter wasn't discussed at Shadow Cabinet or any other forum? Have you spoken to Mr Dutton about it at all?
Of course, we speak in the leadership group all the time. We have regular phone hookups. None of that is an issue at all. And I don't know quite why you're making it an issue, Andrew, because there actually isn't a cigarette paper of difference between what was said by Peter Dutton and what was subsequently said by me.
This is a policy if you get into government and find something.
Well, we will always be ready to act.
Oh, whatever, cigarette paper, but you look as confused hearing that the second time round as you did the first.
Well, Peter Dutton's actually a lot more convincing about it.
Yeah.
And look, I really think that Labor is going to try and make this front bench thing an issue. Susan Lee, Angus Taylor, compare them to our team. So people might not like Albanese and might be willing to give Dutton a chance, but they need a convincing front bench performance, the Dutton team, for this election, because people do know that if they're voting for Peter Dutton, they're not just voting for Peter Dutton. They want a team that's got the experience and competence behind him. In a way, it's a reversal of what Morrison was trying last campaign when he was saying Albanese hadn't held an economic or security portfolio. They're going to turn the tables on experience.
So there's going to be a budget, 25th of March. The conventional wisdom is that they use that momentum and call an election that weekend. But wisdom isn't always conventional, is it?
That's not what I'm hearing. I mean, look, who knows? I've heard so many different things. Someone said, look, you're going to get the election date right because you predicted every single date, they cheekily said to me. But I think at the moment, mate, people in the very senior levels of government are thinking about May 10, waiting for the budget to breathe a bit, look at the poll numbers out of that. Maybe, in the wake of deficits, you don't want to go straight away. But we know they'll be doing energy bill relief, and I'm sure they'll push it up from 300 to 500. So people will be more into that than they will be about the deficits, let's face it. But I think that's a more likely option, which is interesting because people in campaign headquarters in Labor, maybe out of hope more than anything, were telling me last week that they believed he'd go the Sunday after. Look, he might go the Sunday or the Monday too, 13 days after the budget. There's no reason he has to go on a Sunday. I know that's become a tradition in recent years. So havoc for the lives of us journalists and for those involved in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all waiting. Just before I let you go, Andrew, I thought it was really damaging last week, and you can't pick the timing of these things. A price hike, a power price hike, 9% in New South Wales. Chris Bowen asked that question that he's going to be asked time and time and time again. Is that $275? Is it still going to happen? When is it going to happen? Why didn't it happen? They still don't have a good answer on that. They don't want to concede because they don't want to concede going into election campaign. But seriously?
Well,
what did you think when you saw that?
They're saying times have changed, you know.
Oh, sure. Times have changed.
Yeah, I know. Just admit you didn't make the target. I agree with all that.
Not even make the target.
I've tried millions of times. But look, the thing is, as I just said, they've given, because you might recall last election, Angus Taylor halted and delayed the default market offer. So we didn't know how much prices were going up before the election. Now we know. But this is a classic give us the problem and then the so-called solution, right? So instead of a $300 subsidy, they'll give us $500. That will swallow up the 10%. That's my prediction. And they'll say, look, but at the end of the day, as taxpayers, they're just taking our taxes and giving it back to us in an electricity bill rebate, if you know what I mean. So thanks a lot. It's still our money as taxpayers. I mean, it's a bit of a con in that sense, these subsidies. It's such a con.
And to get up, I mean, I just wonder how the Australian public take this, to get up and say, look, bills are going up, but we're going to commit, we're going to put billions and billions of dollars more into the cheapest, most reliable energy, and that is renewables. And no one's seeing any evidence of them being cheap or reliable. I mean, they might eventually be. Modelling says they might eventually be, but they're not right now. God, people just must think, please do not say that to me again.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a different scenario than after the Black Summer bushfires where climate change was playing more at the last election. But the opposition says our short-term solution before nuclear is put more gas in the system. They haven't really explained how they're going to do that. So they need to do that because Labor's also getting gas into the system.
Yep, that's right. All right, great to talk to you as always. We'll see you again soon. Andrew Clennell joining me here on the desk.